self-care warriors, welcome back to Self-Care for Survivors. I'm your host, Shahida Arabi, and today we're going to be talking about some of the common phrases that narcissists say and what they actually mean. So I'm going to be combining two very popular articles that I've written, one of which is 12 Things Narcissists Say and What They Really Mean, and the other one being 7 Gaslighting Phrases Malignant Narcissists Use to Gaslight You. And I'm going to discuss what each of these phrases mean, and I'm going to really translate them for you. So I've actually written several articles on translating things that narcissists usually say, and I basically break down what they're actually saying when they say these things, right? Because when you're dealing with an empathy deficient individual like this, who has this high sense of entitlement, this sadistic need to bring other people down, conversations with these pathological types can become crazy making minefields, right? They're set up to sabotage you, to psychologically terrorize you, to divert you, right? So in order to decode a narcissist's language, we really have to listen more to their actions rather than their words. But their words also say a lot too. So you'll see when a narcissist's words are translated into their actual meaning, the results are frankly disturbing. So here are some of the common words that they use and what they actually mean. Number 1, and a lot of us say these phrases too, but when it comes to a narcissist, they use these phrases differently, right? So number 1, I love you. Translation, I love owning you. I love controlling you. I love using you. It feels so good to love bomb you, to sweet talk you, to pull you in and discard you whenever I please. When I flatter you, I can have anything I want. You trust me. You open up so easily, even after you've already been mistreated. Once you're hooked and invested, I'll pull the rug beneath your feet just to watch you fall. So to a narcissist, love doesn't mean what we mean when we say I love you, right? It means control, it means power, it means micromanaging you, isolating you, coercing you, and love bombing you when they need to in order to get on your good side so that you continue to invest in the relationship. And once you're sufficiently hooked again, they're going to pull the rug from underneath you and they're going to watch you fall. They're going to sabotage you yet again. They're going to abuse you and terrorize you once more. Second phrase, I'm sorry you feel that way. Translation, sorry, not sorry. Let's get this argument over with already so I can continue my abusive behavior in peace. I'm not sorry that I did what I did. I'm sorry that I got caught. I'm sorry that you're calling me out. I'm sorry that I'm being held accountable. I'm sorry that you have the emotions that you do. To me, they're not valid because I'm entitled to have everything I want, regardless of how you feel about it. So we all know that narcissists rarely apologize, but when they do apologize, it's usually strategically, right? It's usually with the crocodile tears, with the fake remorse, right? With that sadistic smile sometimes. And that's because they know that they're going to get away with whatever behavior, whatever kind of mistreatment they're subjecting you to, because as long as they say, I'm sorry, and shut down the conversation before it's even begun, they are not really taking accountability, they're not really taking responsibility for changing their behavior. What they're doing is saying, I'm sorry, in order to get away with it. Third phrase, you're oversensitive or overreacting. Of course, there's a lot of variations of this, right? Like you're blowing things out of proportion. And I'll discuss this more in the gaslighting segment of this podcast episode. So this phrase is you're oversensitive, overreacting. And the translation is you're having a perfectly normal reaction to an immense amount of bullshit that I'm throwing your way. But all I see is that you're catching on. Let me gaslight you some more so you second guess yourself. Emotionally invalidating you is the key to keeping you compliant. So long as you don't trust yourself, you'll work that much harder to rationalize, minimize, and deny my abuse. While you're working so hard to please me, I'm reaping all of the benefits without any consequences for my behavior. So this is a very common gaslighting tactic, which we'll talk about more in the gaslighting segment. But that is a very common thing that they say in order to make you believe that you are really in the wrong in having this kind of legitimate reaction to being abused. Whether you're angry, whether you're calling them out, even if you're calling them out in the most rational, calm, gentle manner possible, they will still accuse you of overreacting because their agenda is not to validate your feelings, it's not to take accountability for their behavior, but it's to convince you that you are in the wrong for calling out the abuse in the first place. To them, it's not the abuse that's the problem, it's the fact that you even dare to stand up for yourself and dare to call it out when you are being abused, right? Fourth phrase, you're crazy. And again, we will discuss this more in depth in the gaslighting segment, but a quick translation of that is, I am a master of creating and manufacturing chaos to provoke you. I love it when you react. That way, I can point the finger and say, you're the crazy one. After all, no one would listen to what you have to say about me if they thought you were just bitter or unstable. Forget the fact that I'm the one who's truly rageful and irrational, lashing out at anything that threatens my sense of superiority, right? So, when a narcissist calls you crazy, it's really because they're the pathological one, right? They're the ones who are provoking this chaos. They're the ones who are provoking you. They're poking, they're prodding, they're insulting, and they're constantly bringing up these crazy-making arguments. And it really does help in the smear campaign if they do a smear campaign of you later on when they call you that crazy ex, or they call you that crazy ex-friend, or that crazy ex-family member, what have you, to paint you as this very bitter and unstable person because you're the one who's calling them the abuser, or you're the one who is apparently losing it because you have called out what they're doing and you have tried to expose them for who they really are. And so convincing you that you're crazy or going crazy is yet another gaslighting technique that they can use to make you feel like you're the defective one in the relationship, when in fact all you're doing is seeing the abuse for what it is, right? So you're not really crazy, you're actually far more sane and rational, and you're behaving far more sane and rational than the abuser is. And they're just trying to divert from that fact, right? Fifth phrase, my exes are all crazy. Translation, I made my exes crazy. It was so fun. All I had to do was provoke, poke, and prod until I got a reaction. Finally, when I did, I used those reactions against them to show everyone how unhinged they are. Soon, you'll be the crazy ex too. So remember, they also devalue their exes, right? They're always talking about their crazy exes. Now, there is an exception here. If you're dealing with a complex trauma survivor who's had a number of narcissists come into their lives, they've become entangled with toxic people, and they are an empathic human being, then they usually aren't the narcissist in that scenario. However, I'm talking about narcissists who will offer that information, right, unsolicited. If first conversation you have with them, they are constantly going on about how their exes were crazy, they were obsessed with them, how was jealous of your special relationship with the narcissist, right? And they're doing this so that you won't consult with the ex, so you won't compare stories, so you will believe that the ex crying out abuse is telling falsehoods, and you will start to gaslight yourself into thinking that this is actually a nice person who's just been beaten down and bullied by other people, when in fact they are the ones who are pathological. Sixth phrase, he or she is just a friend. Translation, I keep this person as a backup for whenever I get bored. They may replace you if you leave. In fact, they may already be acting as a valuable side piece. If you complain about my shady behavior with this person, I'll make sure you seem like the controlling one. And a lot of us have experienced this, right? The accusation that you are crazy or controlling. We'll get to this later in the gaslighting segment. When the narcissist claims that someone is just a friend, I would be very wary, because usually their friends are in reality harem members, side pieces, the side chick or the side guy, and they're just there as, placeholders, so that if you start acting up, they'll start to triangulate and they'll start to devalue. And by acting up, I mean, of course, calling them out on their abuse, or even if they just get bored. They always need extra chess pieces. They always need people to play with and put down and maneuver and pit against one another. And that's the way that they rig their game, right? Because everyone's so busy vying for their attention, competing for their praise and their approval and their validation, that nobody really stops to think, well, is this narcissistic person actually even worth my efforts, right? And rather than focusing on the abuse, you get tangled up in this web of competition in order to win the grand prize, which is really not a grand prize at all. It's really just a setup to get someone who isn't worthy of you, who isn't worthy of your attention. 7th phrase, you're so jealous and insecure. Translation, God, this love triangle is fun. I love the way you compete for my attention. Makes me feel so desirable and powerful when I flirt with others in front of you. Gets you riled up. It's especially entertaining to manufacture insecurities in you by pointing out flaws that don't exist or to pick at the wounds that already do. The more diminished you feel, the less likely you'll try to escape my grasp. The truth is, everything you suspect about my flirtations and affairs is grounded in reality. But let me remind you, I am entitled to everything, and that includes the attention of other romantic prospects. So we all know that narcissists create love triangles, right? They manufacture these love triangles, they create harems of admirers, and they try to compare you with the other harem members, with their other potential romantic prospects, or their just friends, in order to make you feel insecure. And when you do express that insecurity in any way, the insecurity that they manufactured, you will be accused of being someone who is irrational, who is jealous, who is crazy, right? And that leads on to the 8th phrase, you have trust issues. Translation, I am an untrustworthy person, which I've shown time and time again by betraying you. Your gut is right, but it'll be a cold day in hell if I ever admit it. The best thing you could probably do is trust yourself and run in the other direction. But of course, that would be far less fun for me. So when a narcissist tells you that you have trust issues, it's because they have being trustworthy issues. It's not because of your trust issues. You're not imagining it. They are flirting in front of you. They are creating these love triangles. They are having affairs, no doubt about it. Someone who lacks that kind of empathy has no problem engaging in infidelity, engaging in these sort of twisted mind games. So remember, when you're dealing with a narcissistic person, whether or not you have trust issues or have had trust issues in the past is irrelevant, because when you are dealing with a narcissist, your trust issues are completely warranted. The 9th phrase is, it's not all about you. Translation, it's really all about me, me, me. If you ever turn the attention back to your own needs, I'll make sure to project my own self-centeredness onto you. I'll make you feel guilty and ashamed of having these needs in the first place because I'll never be able to fulfill them. I just don't have the emotional equipment to do so, nor do I want to, because it takes the focus away from the person who's really important, me. So when narcissists tell you that you're self-centered, that you're selfish, it's really because you're setting boundaries. And to a narcissist, anyone who sets boundaries is going to be considered selfish and self-centered. And of course, that's a complete projection, because the narcissist is the one who is selfish and egotistical and is all about him, or her, right? And if you dare to even bring yourself up, if you dare to even bring up your own needs or your own human rights at any point during the relationship, you're going to be accused of being selfish. Because to a narcissist's excessive sense of entitlement, your needs scream to them that their control is going to be taken away from them. So really the next logical step in their crazy minds is that they have to accuse you of being selfish. They have to accuse you of focusing only on you, even if you've been focusing on them for years and decades and centuries. It doesn't matter how much you've invested in them. It doesn't matter how much time, money, energy you've spent on them. You will always be accused of being selfish if you dare to stand up for yourself and if you dare to talk about your own needs. The 10th phrase is, why can't we remain friends? Translation, I really don't like losing members of my personal harem. I'd prefer to keep you on the back burner in case I need to use you in the future. Plus, collecting exes is a kind of a hobby of mine. It's so convenient to be able to reach out to one whenever I'm feeling especially bored. Who knew being friends could be such a great way to prevent losing valuable sources of supply, right? So, This is their, let's remain friends shtick, and it all serves to keep you as part of the harem. If you notice, a lot of narcissists do have exes on the back burner to pick up where they left off just in case, and to triangulate you with the old partners and the new partners. And really, no ex is really ever completely out of the picture if the narcissist has managed to control them somehow. So they're always keeping them around just to triangulate you with them, have affairs with them behind your back, and really to pick up where they left off, because narcissists do not let go of control. Whether you're an ex or a current partner, they do not let go of control over your life because they always want to maintain that control over you. They always want to be able to check up on you, to make sure that you haven't moved forward with a new partner, and they want to be in control of your happiness, and they're not willing to let go of that emotional control even after the expiration date of a relationship. That's why they tend to hoover, right? Hoovering, as we know it, is sucking people back into the traumatic vortex of the relationship, and it's aptly called Hoover after the Hoover vacuum, right? If you notice that a narcissist asks you to be friends, beware. It's because they see you as a source of supply, and they're just using you. They're exploiting you. And in fact, a research study has actually shown that those who have narcissistic and psychopathic traits tend to remain friends with their exes due to the fact that they want to use them for sex and their resources. So it really is exploitation if a narcissist asks you to remain their friend. 11th phrase, no one would believe you. Translation, I've isolated you to the point where you feel you have no support. I've smeared your name to others ahead of time so people already suspect the lies I've told about you. So yes, some people may not believe you, especially the ones who still think I'm an amazing person, especially the people who continue to enable me. There are still others who might believe you though, so I can't risk being caught. Making you feel alienated and alone is the best way for me to protect my image. It's the best way to convince you to remain silent and never speak the truth about who I really am. So a narcissist can isolate you through coercion and physically isolate you, but they also emotionally isolate you from others. They tend to convince you that nobody would believe you if you ever told a story about them. And child predators do this too, as I would like to add. When they're in the grooming process of grooming a child, they might tell the child to frighten the child into never speaking up, that no one would believe you, or that, there's going to be harm that comes to you or your family if you ever speak out. And that's the way they isolate the child into believing that they can't speak up. And, when you're doing this to an adult, it's also effective because when you continually tell an abuse victim, nobody likes you, nobody will believe you, you're crazy, and you're instilling in them this subconscious programming about who they are and their reality, they start to internalize these distortions over time, right? And the trauma bond is so strong that you are so tethered to this person as both a source of comfort as well as a source of your abuse. And even though they abuse you, you look to them for comfort because the bond develops as a way to survive the abuse cycle. So when a narcissist tells you no one would believe you, it's because they know that a lot of people might believe you and they're scared of you exposing them. The 12th phrase is, you'll never find someone else like me. Translation, if you never find someone else like me, that's a good thing. There are empathic people out there who will treat you far better than I ever did, but I'd never want you to find them or discover your true worth. I'd prefer you to keep pining after me. So when a narcissist tells you you'll never find someone else like me, just tell them that's the point. Even if you do run into another narcissist, they're all very eerily similar, right? What the narcissist is saying when they say this is that I'm someone that can't be replaced, and that's their own kind of delusion of being unique and special, but they're really not unique and special, right? Because there's a lot of predators who follow the same kind of gimmicks, who follow the same type of toxic behaviors. And so if you never meet someone like a narcissist, then that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And it means that there are a lot more empathic people out in the world who do not resemble your narcissist, and that's a very good thing. So now let's move on to the gaslighting segment of this episode. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, gaslighting is an insidious erosion of your sense of reality. It creates a mental fog of epic proportions and the twisted funhouse of smoke, mirrors, and distortions that is an abusive relationship. When a malignant narcissist gaslights you, they engage in crazy-making discussions and character assassinations where they challenge and invalidate your thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and sanity. Gaslighting enables narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths to exhaust you to the point where you are unable to fight back. Rather than finding healthy ways to detach from this toxic person, you are sabotaged in your efforts to find a sense of certainty and validation in what you've experienced, right? Now, gaslighting can take many forms, from questioning the status of your mental health to outright challenging your lived experiences. And as we know, the most dangerous culprits of gaslighting are malignant narcissists who, by default, use gaslighting as a strategy to undermine the perception of their victims in order to evade accountability for their abuse, and they can callously and sadistically use gaslighting because they lack that remorse, they lack that empathy, they lack that conscience to have any limits about what they will gaslight you about, or how they terrorize you or covertly provoke you. And I like to call gaslighting by a malignant narcissist as covert murder with clean hands, because it allows the perpetrator to get away with their mistreatment while depicting the actual victims as the abusers. And the real victims rarely ever get the justice that they deserve. So I've spoken to, thousands of survivors of malignant narcissists who've shared their stories of gaslighting, of narcissistic abuse. And so I'm going to share with you some of the most commonly used gaslighting phrases that these predators use. And I'm sure there's many more and many variations of what I'm about to share. And actually, some of these I've already shared in the first part of this segment. I'm just going to go more in depth into the gaslighting part of that phrase, right? So the first one you've already heard before: you're crazy, you have mental health issues, you need help. Translation: you're not the pathological one here. You're just catching on to who I really am behind the mask, and you're attempting to hold me accountable for my questionable behavior. But I'd rather you question your own sanity so you believe that the problem is really you, rather than my own deceptiveness and manipulation. So long as you believe that you're the one who needs help, I'll never have to take responsibility for changing my own distorted ways of thinking and behaving. Malignant narcissists play the smirking doctors to their victims, treating them like unruly patients, right? They diagnose their victims with mental health issues or for having emotions, basically, as a way to pathologize their victims and undermine their credibility, not to just the victims themselves, but to society at large. And this is even more effective when abusers are able to provoke reactions in their victims to convince society that they are the ones with mental health issues. And according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, some abusers will actually actively drive their victims to the edge in order to concoct proof of their instability. In fact, the hotline estimates that around 89% of their callers have experienced some form of mental health coercion, and that 43% of them had experienced a substance abuse coercion from an abuser. So even if you did have any kind of mental health issues like anxiety or depression or maybe even substance abuse issues, the abuser will actively try to drive you over the edge and use those issues against you in order to gain custody, to use it against them with important authorities such as legal or child custody professionals. And the National Center on Domestic Violence actually says that most survivors who were reporting their abusive partners, these abusive partners had actively contributed to mental health difficulties or their use of substances, right? Now, even if you don't have any substance abuse issues or even if you don't have any mental health issues, and, a lot of survivors don't have any of these issues, these predators will go so far as to create these issues, right? They might make you dependent on a substance. They might try to encourage an addiction in you. For anybody who's read, Girl on the Train, spoiler alert, the husband basically is able to exacerbate the woman's existing substance abuse issues in order to drive her over the edge and make her believe that she is the abuser when in fact he is the abuser. So this is a classic case of when the gaslighting phrase, "you're crazy, you have mental health issues, you need help," is taken even further in order to manufacture proof of the victim's instability. Second gaslighting phrase is, "you're just insecure and jealous." Translation: I enjoy planting seeds of insecurity and doubt in your mind about your attractiveness, your competence, and your personality and character. If you dare to question my numerous flirtations, affairs, and inappropriate interactions, I'll be sure to put you back in your place in fear of losing me. The problem, as I'll convince you, isn't my deceptive behavior. It's your inability to remain confident while I perpetually put you down, compare you in demeaning ways to others, and eventually cast you aside for the next best thing. Again, as we've talked about before, manufacturing these love triangles and harems are a narcissist's forte, right? Robert Greene, author of The Art of Seduction, speaks about creating, quote unquote, an aura of desirability, which stirs this frenzied sense of competition among potential suitors. And in abuse survivor communities, as you well know, this tactic is known as triangulation. It grants malignant narcissists a depraved sense of power over their victims. They actively provoke jealousy in their intimate partners in order to control them and paint them as unhinged. And again, as we've already said, it's common for these narcissists to label the victims insecure, controlling, and jealous to avoid suspicion and to continue to reap the benefits of multiple sources of attention, praise, and ego strokes. And remember, to someone who has something to hide, everything feels like an interrogation. Narcissists will often lash out in narcissistic rage. They will lash out in stonewalling and excessive defensiveness when confronted with evidence of their betrayals. All you have to watch is, R. Kelly in an interview to see a classic example of narcissistic rage when confronted with the truth, even calmly and rationally. And they will rage at you because to someone who has so much to hide, everything is going to feel like a threat to their excessive sense of entitlement, and they feel like you should not be able to question them. So they will tell you that you're interrogating them should you dare to bring up the truth. And here's another gaslighting phrase that we've already heard, but we're going to talk about it from the gaslighting perspective. "You're too sensitive, you're overreacting." Translation: it's not that you're too sensitive, but rather that I am insensitive, callous, and unempathic. I do not care about your emotions unless they serve me in some way. Actually, your negative reactions do provide me stimulation and pleasure, so please do keep going. I enjoy putting you down for having legitimate reactions to my abuse. According to Dr. Robin Stern, one of the effects of gaslighting includes asking yourself, "Am I too sensitive?" a dozen times a day. Claiming that victims are overreacting or oversensitive to emotional abuse is a popular way for malignant narcissists to override your certainty about the severity of the abuse you experienced. Now, whether or not someone is a sensitive person is irrelevant when it comes to cases of psychological or physical violence. Abuse affects anyone and everyone of varying sensitivity levels, and its impact should not be taken lightly regardless of how sensitive someone truly is. A mark of a healthy partner is that they give you the space to be sensitive if you want to be, to feel your feelings, and to provide emotional validation, even if they do not agree with you. Now, a malignant narcissist, on the other hand, will excessively focus on your so-called sensitivity even if it does not exist, and they will consistently claim that you are overreacting rather than owning their horrific actions when called out, regardless of whether or not you are actually sensitive. I have to repeat this. It doesn't matter if you are sensitive. Even if you are a very highly sensitive person, if someone is abusing you, that does not matter. You are going to be sensitive to their abuse regardless of whether or not you are already sensitive. People who are not as sensitive also get affected by abuse. So being sensitive does not negate their abuse, is what I'm trying to say. The fourth gaslighting phrase is, "It was just a joke. You have no sense of humor." Translation: I love disguising my abusive behavior as just jokes. I like calling you names, putting you down, and then claiming that you're the one who lacks the sense of humor to appreciate my depraved sense of wit. Making you feel defective allows me to say and do whatever I wish, all with a smile and contemptuous laugh. Disguising cruel remarks, off-color comments, and put-downs as just jokes is actually a popular verbal abuse tactic, according to Patricia Evans, author of The Verbally Abusive Relationship. This malicious tactic is very different from playful teasing, which takes a certain amount of rapport, trust, and mutual enjoyment, right? So you're probably someone who actually has a pretty good sense of humor, and you can probably laugh at, dark humor or body humor, but a narcissist is not really joking when they give out these covert put-downs. When malignant narcissists dole out these unsettling jokes, they can engage in acts of name-calling, taunting, belittling, and contempt, all while evading the responsibility of issuing an apology or owning their vicious verbal assaults. You are then gaslighted into believing that it is your inability to appreciate the humor behind their cruelty rather than the reality of its abusive intentions. Just jokes are also used to test boundaries early on in an abusive relationship. You may have noticed that if you've ever been in a long-term relationship with an abuser, it probably started off with these off-color comments. And what you may have rationalized as a tone-deaf comment in the beginning can escalate into psychological violence quite quickly in the hands of these predators. If you find that you have a partner who laughs at you more than they laugh with you, run. It will not get any better. It will just get worse. Fifth gaslighting phrase: you need to let it go. Why are you bringing this up again? Translation: I haven't given you enough time to even process the last heinous incident of abuse, but you need to let it go already so I can move forward with exploiting you without facing any consequences for my behavior. Let me love bomb you into thinking that things will be different this time around. Don't bring up my past patterns of abusive behavior, because you'll then recognize that this is a cycle that will just continue. In any abuse cycle, it's common for an abuser to engage in a hot and cold cycle where they periodically throw in crumbs of affection to keep you hooked and to renew hope for a return to the honeymoon phase. This is a manipulation tactic known as intermittent reinforcement, and it's common for an abuser to terrorize you only to return the next day and act like nothing has happened. When you do recall any abusive incidents, an abuser will tell you to just let it go so they can sustain the abuse cycle. This form of abuse amnesia adds on to your addictive bond to the abuser, also known as the trauma bond, as we've discussed before. According to Dr. Logan, trauma bonding is evidence in any relationship which the connection defies logic, and it's very hard to break. The components necessary for a trauma bond to form are a power differential, intermittent good and bad treatment, as well as high arousal and bonding periods. So when a narcissist keeps telling you to let it go, let it go, let it go, why are you bringing this up again? You don't get to process the abuse that occurred, and the trauma bond continues to be strengthened because you minimize, rationalize, deny, and brush aside the abusive incidents time and time again. The sixth gaslighting phrase is, you're the problem here, not me, right? They might say something like, this is all you. Translation: I am the problem here, but I'll be damned if I let you know it. I'd rather subject you to personal attacks as you bend over backwards, trying to hit constantly moving goalposts and arbitrary expectations of the way I think you should feel and behave. And as you spend most of your time trying to fix your fabricated flaws while always coming up short of what I deem worthy, I can just sit back, relax, and continue to mistreat you the way I feel entitled to. You won't have any energy left to call me out. So it's common for abusive partners to engage in malignant projection like this, right? To even go so far as to call their victims the narcissists and the abusers, and to dump their own malignant qualities and behaviors and traits onto their victims. This is a way for them to gaslight their victims into believing that they are the ones at fault, and that their reactions to the abuse, rather than the abuse itself, is the problem. According to narcissistic personality clinical expert Dr. Martinez Louis, these projections tend to be psychologically abusive. As she writes, the narcissist is never wrong. He or she automatically blames others when anything goes awry. It is very stressful to be the recipient of narcissistic projections. The sheer force of the narcissist's accusations is stunning and disorienting. The seventh gaslighting phrase is, I never said or did that. You're imagining things. Translation: making you question what I did or said allows me to cast doubt on your perceptions and memories of the abuse you've experienced. If I make you think that you're imagining things, you'll start to wonder if you're going crazy, rather than pinpointing the evidence, the hard evidence, which proves that I am an abuser and a manipulator. In the infamous movie Gaslight, Gregory causes his new wife to believe that her aunt's house is haunted so she can be institutionalized. That way he can gain access to her family jewels. He does everything from rearranging items in the house, flickering gas lights on and off, to making noises in the attic, so that she is no longer able to discern whether or not what she's seeing is real. He isolates her so that she is unable to gain validation. After manufacturing these crazy-making scenarios, he then convinces her that all of these events are all a figment of her imagination. Many victims of chronic gaslighting struggle with the cognitive dissonance which occurs when their abuser tells them that they never did or said something. Much like reasonable doubt can sway a jury, even the hint that something may not have happened after all can be powerful enough to override someone's perceptions. Researchers Hasher, Goldstein, and Topino call this the illusory truth effect. They discovered that when falsehoods are repeated, they are more likely to be internalized as true, simply due to the effects of repetition. That is why continual denial and minimization can be so effective in convincing victims of gaslighting that they are indeed imagining things or suffering from memory loss, rather than standing firm in their beliefs and experiences. The big picture. In order to resist the effects of gaslighting, you must get in touch with your own reality and prevent yourself from getting entrapped into an endless loop of self-doubt. Learn to identify the red flags of malignant narcissists and their manipulation tactics so you can get out of disorienting, crazy-making conversations with malignant narcissists before they escalate into wild accusations, projections, blame shifting, and put-downs, which will only exacerbate your sense of confusion. Develop a sense of self-validation and self-trust so that you can get in touch with how you really feel about the way someone is treating you, rather than getting stuck attempting to explain yourself to a manipulator with an agenda. Getting space from your abuser is essential. Be sure to document events as they happened, rather than how your abuser tells you they happened. Save text messages, voicemails, emails, audio, or video recordings, if permitted in your state laws, which can help you to remember the facts in times of mental fog, rather than subscribing to the distortions and the delusions of the abuser. Engage in extreme self-care by participating in mind-body healing modalities which target the physical as well as the psychological symptoms of the abuse. Recovery is important to achieve mental clarity. Enlist the help of a third party, such as a trauma-informed therapist, and go through the incidents of abuse together to anchor yourself back to what you've experienced. Malignant narcissists might attempt to rewrite your reality, but you don't have to accept their twisted narratives as truth. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode, and I hope you're getting closer to translating the phrases that narcissists use to gaslight, terrorize, and confuse you. And I hope that you can use these translations to your benefit to realize when a narcissist is being pathologically envious, when a narcissist is trying to hoover you, when a narcissist is trying to triangulate you, when a narcissist is trying to get away with their crimes, and when a narcissist is trying to rewrite what actually happened, so that you can replace their twisted narratives with the truth. I'm Shahida Arabi, your host, and I'm wishing you a great, amazing week. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode. If you did, please do leave a comment sharing your experience below and the phrases that you've heard from narcissists to help other survivors heal. And again, just as a reminder, I'm your host, Shahida Arabi, and I am the best-selling author of Power: Surviving and Thriving After Narcissistic Abuse, as well as Becoming the Narcissist Nightmare, and my new essay collection for adult children of narcissists, Healing the Adult Children of Narcissists, Essays on the Invisible War Zone. I'll talk to you guys soon, and until next time, take care.